shalom.
I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations. Neither are you here to live up to mine. Yeah. I don't owe no one, no obligation. No one owe me none, so everything is fine, fine. I said I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am. Don't underestimate my ability. Don't definite my character. Don't belittle my authority. It's time you recognize my quality. I said I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I said I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am. Learn to love your brother. Don't covet your neighbor. Flee from the city, it's getting shitty. It is full of autocrity. I said I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am that I am, I am, I am, I am. I am the rock of ages, you cannot move I at all. I am the son of lightning, you cannot move I at all. Son of Jacob cannot be moved at all. I am the son of Moses, you can move I at all. I am the son of David, you cannot move at all. I'm firm like thunder, you cannot move at all. You could have shed more tears, you cannot move at all. You could have full of evil, you cannot move at all. You could have tried more nothing, you cannot move at all. And you try to lick something that can move at all. And could have come with ism, you can move at all. And if you come with ism, that can move at all.
Because it said, here comes the judge.
Shalom, shalom.
And that doesn't
All
mean
praises.
the judge in what they call in our colonial judiciary system, see, in our imperial judiciary system. I mean the judge of righteousness.
Here comes the judge. Hear ye him. Oh yeah, God save the African king. Anyone have anything to say before this just judge? Come say it now and say it like you're glad, and not like you're mad. For this judge have no mercy in this time.
session. Silence in the court. The court's in session. Silence in the court. The court's in session. Silence in the court. The court's in session.
Christopher Cumberlas.
Yes, sir.
Francis Drake.
Yes, my lord.
Bartholomew de las Casas.
Your Honor.
Vasco da Gama.
Present. Majesty.
Alexander so-called the Great.
I am here, sir. I am here.
John Hannon.
Sir.
James Grant.
Your Honor.
David Livingstone.
Yes, present. Miranda, present.
John Constantine.
Yes, sir.
Henry Martin.
Yes,
Arthur Polo.
yes, sir.
Now say after me. I solemnly swear that the evidence I shall give shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Silence in the court. The court's in session. 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 Silence in the court. The court's in session.
You're all brought here. And count one. Robbing and raping Africa.
Shalom, shalom. All praises to the Most High in the name of Yahshua HaMashiach. I want to thank y'all for y'all time while checking out this video today, but I do want you to know we got a powerful presentation coming up. Today we'll be looking at the science of indigenous jewelry of West Africa. And in the spirit of African culture, I'm going to let the elders whom I place honors upon start us off in getting the working mindset and a true narrative of who the true children of Israel are.
Born in Puerto Rico, the eastern end, and Fajardo, the family, primarily the family were in St. Croix, St. Thomas, and Fajardo, the eastern end of Puerto Rico, and a number of them were in the island off there called Vieques. They originally migrated from Yemen, the group, to Spain. They were called Ladinos, and then they wind up in Puerto Rico. I was born into the Hebrew religion, and in the Virgin Islands, unfortunately, there was only one synagogue. And it was.
Wait a minute, who was Jewish? Your father?
Both parties.
Your mother's Jewish too?
Yeah. And my father found it necessary at time to dabble in Roman Catholicism. Since in St. Christ there was no Jewish synagogue, there was one in St. Thomas, and seeing a black person who was Jewish was an oddity. And as it's still even up to today, as a matter of fact, most European Jews denied there was such thing as black Jews at that time, and not one of my teachers taught me anything about Africa, even the best of them.
Did your father teach you much about Africa and tell you much about?
Quite so. In discussion, my father would always, because of his own knowledge and because of being in the UNA, the Garvey movement, anytime I would speak about certain things, as a matter of fact, when Daddy spoke to me about the Torah or the Old Testament, he constantly pointed out to me that which is of Africa in it. For instance, Daddy would say, well, Moses, he was an African, he was born in Egypt. Long before, when people look at the map, and although they saw Egypt there, didn't recognize Egypt as being in Africa, my father had made that very clear to me.
There are black Hebrews, there are brown Hebrews, there are yellow Hebrews. How is it that a bunch of Europeans called Jews dominate the word Jew to the extent of making you think that the very faith Hebrews is exclusive to them?
So there we have it, straight from the master teacher's mouth on who the children of Israel and their descendants are. And now we will hear the foundation of those who reject that science, and I will expose it as nothing but regurgitated 18th century beliefs based in racism and white supremacy. So let's look at what I call the hatred for the Hamite hypothesis and the voices and the thoughts that go behind it.
Indicate that Dr. Ben, in his concern for the need in the black community for cultural and ideological structures and unity, which is obviously a laudable and praiseworthy goal, then proceeds to redefine Jewish history and biblical history in a way which may be conducive to his political view, but does violence to history. He refers to Judaism as originating in Africa, that all of Judaism comes from Africa. The reality of the biblical text, one has merely opened it to read, is that Abraham comes from Mesopotamia. He comes from the area which we today refer to as the Fertile Crescent. Indeed, what we refer today as Judaism, the religion of the Jewish people, reached its full maturity not in Egypt, but according to many scholars, after the first exile in 586 BCE, back into Mesopotamia.
The Hamitic theory, based on racial differentiation, has arranged the world races into superior, inferior levels. The first race are Teutonic Anglo-Saxons from Europe, and the last ones are Negroes from Africa, especially those found south of the Sahara Desert. It classified the African races into Hamites and Negroes. Egyptians are said to be descendants of Mizraim, of Caucasian non-cursed race, hence they were not part of the inferior Negroes. The generations of other sons of Ham in Africa, who in Hamitic hypothesis have been considered as the source of civilization in Africa, are the Egyptians, Nubians, Galas, Danakil, Tutsis, Somali, Bahais of Eastern Africa, and Berbers, Tubis, Fulbe, and Ganchus of North Africa. Those societies are said to be not inferior like Negroes, who were uncivilized and looked like animals since they were eating herbs, walked naked, supposedly sex with any person they met, sister or mother, and taken as slaves in Egypt. It's based in the notion that anything good to Negroes is from white Hamites, descendants of the other sons of Ham, other than the cursed Canaan, the father of the Negroes. So there we have it, the hatred for the Hamite hypothesis. And I will show that all the arguments that speak against the Aboriginal Israelite being black is based in its antiquated belief and paradigm. Because for one, if you make that claim in the negative, you're either ignorantly uninformed or being purposely duplicitous, or like the hatred for the Hamite hypothesis, you believe the Egyptians and Kushites to be white. So let's get to our claims. The claims that we of the Israelite extraction state is that we are the descendants of Jacob, founder of the Israelite nation, existing among several other nations of people within Africa, with nation being defined as found in the scripture as being descended from a patriarchal ancestor, with tribal designations such as Yoruba, Akan, Igbo, being only a modern diffusion of a greater national pedigree from earlier times. Now, to make such a statement as it relates to world history, one must endeavor to engage in a critical study of human history, which is the carefully researched description of humanity's past by archaeology, anthropology, genetics, linguistics, and recorded history. Now, the process of one doing that is described as your methodology. Methodology is the systematic, theoretical analysis of the methods applied to a field of study. It comprises the theoretical analysis of the body of methods and principles associated with a branch of knowledge. Now, within your methodology, you have these disciplines, just to name a few. You have the anthropological, which is the overall study of the people you are studying, be the people ancient or not. You have linguistical, which is the study of languages and its relation to and or independence of other languages. You have historical, recorded narrative based on a written record or other documented communication. historical method is the collection of techniques and guidelines that historians use to research, and the interpretation of recorded history often relies on the historical method, or the set of techniques and guidelines by which historians use primary sources and other evidence to research and then to write about accounts of the past. You have the archaeological, which is the scientific study of the material remains of past human life and activities. These include human artifacts from the very earliest stone tools to the man-made objects that are buried or thrown away in present day. Everything made by human beings, from simple tools to complex machines, from the earliest houses and temples and tombs to palaces, cathedrals, and pyramids. Archaeological investigators are a principal source of knowledge of prehistoric, ancient, and extinct culture. So we have also the genetic, but we're not going to get into that because I don't deal with that, and particularly I'm not dealing with that in this study. But these are the principles that we will be dealing with, and as we know that the point to be proven today is that the sons of Jacob and his subsequent indigenous citizens of Jerusalem were widely dispersed throughout all Africa, and that they, the Israelites, are what we call the sub-Saharan Negro type. And we're looking at the evidence. I want you all to keep in mind that as we see here, it's people from 7 different nations and several different time periods as well. So all the claims of some supposed conspiracy or fabricated insertion of Jewish culture by Jewish missionaries in the 19th and 20th century falls on deaf ears. So let's start with Avaris. Avaris is the Hisco capital of Egypt, located at the modern site of Tel el-Dabra. Its position at the hub of Egypt's emporium made it a major capital suitable for trade. When starting our journey, we are going to quickly look at the city of Avaris and the archaeological dig conducted there by Manfred Bitek. Known as the director of Austrian excavations at the site in now Tel el-Dabra, Avaris, the capital of the Hyksos period, Manfred Bitek has been digging at el-Dabra for over 40 years. He has identified it as Avaris, the ancient Hyksos capital, and at the site there were a plethora of Shemitic influenced themes, including this courtyard made in a Shemitic design, along with 12 tombs, and one being identified as the principal tomb due to its Egyptian influence. But also, one of the most glaring things from the site that I came across was a fragmented statue that we see here. Now, the site of Avaris is proposed by Bitek to be a possible location for Joseph and the Israelites' residence. And here we see different renderings of the statue, which I must admit, when I seen it, threw me for a loop because it looked non-African. And when we see further renderings made by non-African, racially subjective scholars, conscious of it or not, it portrays a Joseph clearly with European features and lineage. However, when you look at the African culture, clearly it's African in its nature. Now, one of the first things that grabbed me was the chiseled head, which to me attempts to portray the texture and lay of European hair, or rather hair. However, we can see it's evidently altered and cruelly done. So if that was the purpose, it's a very juvenile attempt. However, what I do want you to know, this is the true rendering of the statue found at Avaris. Here we see the Afar people of East Africa, and it's clear to see the uncanny resemblance of the statue from Avaris. From the meticulous shaped afro down to the even minute texture and detail is an exact replication of the statue we see. So besides the people being of Shemitic descent, we can see its true Black interpretation and not the European image given to us in these days and times. Now let's go to ancient authors and get a more credible account as well of the appearance of the Israelites. Here we have Tacitus. Tacitus, writing in the 1st century, said that the Jews are said to have been refugees from the island of Crete, who settled in the remotest corner of Libya in the days when, according to the story, Saturn was driven from his throne by the aggressions of Jupiter. So that there it says they're Cretans. Now it also says this is a deduction from the name Judai, by which they became known. The word is to be regarded as barbarian, but let's go ahead on. It also says a few authorities hold that in the reign of Isis, the surplus population of Egypt was evacuated to neighboring lands. So there we have Egyptians. And here we have descended from those Ethiopians who were driven by fear and hatred to immigrate from their home country. And lastly, they said that there are some who say that a motley collection of landless Assyrians occupied a part of Egypt. So here we have Cretans, we have Egyptians, Ethiopians, and Assyrians. And according to all of the information provided, regardless of what the hatred for the Hermetic hypothesis says, all of these are African so-called black people. Strabo, another ancient historian, says in the Geography of Strabo, Volume 1, that the western extremities of Judea toward Caucasus are occupied by Idumeans and by the Lake Sarbonis. The Idumeans are Nabateans. When driven from their country by sedition, they passed over to the Jews and adopted their customs. The greater part of the country along the coast of Jerusalem is occupied by the Lake Sarbonis and by the tract continuous to it. For Jerusalem is near the sea, which, as we have said, may have been from the arsenal of Joppa. These districts of Jerusalem and Joppa lie towards the north. They are inhabited generally, and each place in particular, by mixed tribes of Egyptians, Arabians, and Phoenicians. Of this description are the inhabitants of Galilee, of the plain of Jericho, and the territories of Philadelphia. But although there is such a mixture of inhabitants, the report most credited among many things believed respecting the temple and the inhabitants of Jerusalem is that the Egyptians were the ancestor of the present Jews. Now let's go down to Benjamin Tudela, a traveler of the 12th century, and in page 92 of his book, Itinerary of Benjamin Tudela, he say, they worship the sun, and they have high places everywhere outside the city at a distance about half a mile. And every morning they run forward to greet the sun, for on every high place a solar disk is made of cunning workmanship. And as the sun rises, the disk rotates with thundering noise. And all, both men, women, offer incense to the sun with censers in their hands. Such are their superstitious practices. And throughout the island, including all the towns there, live several thousand Israelites. The inhabitants are all black, and the Jews also. In the history of the Jewish Coptic, the great question of the extinction of race has been considered. These races, placed by theorists with the so-called Caucasian race, and at the head of the Caucasian family, are considered as belonging to the dark races of men. They are African and Asiatic, not European. The purest of the Jewish race is a dark, tawny, yellow-colored person with jet black hair and eyes seemingly colored. There is no mistaking the race when pure. It is Egyptian, that is African.
Brown Hebrew, yellow Hebrew. How is it that a bunch of Europeans called Jews dominate the word Jew to the extent of making you think that the very faith Hebrew is exclusive to them?
So with the evidence provided, we clearly see an African Ethiopic phenotype or physiognomy ascribed to the ancient Israelites, which now brings me to my second point, which we would just as the first point establish thoroughly, and that is the sons of Jacob, or the sons, or rather his subsequent indigenous citizens of Jerusalem, were widely dispersed throughout all Africa, and that they Israelites are what we call the sub-Saharan Negro type. So I'm gonna say that again because it's kind of got confused. The point to be proven now is that the sons of Jacob and his subsequent indigenous citizens of Jerusalem were widely dispersed throughout all Africa, and that they are what we call the sub-Saharan Negro type. And with that, we'll start with Axum. The renowned Aksumite Empire of Ethiopia is a well-known and acknowledged people of Israelite descent. From the Ashkenaz, conscious community, scholars, the whole nine, this is a recognized fact. What is not notable or is revealed is the facts behind the creation of the Aksumite Empire and its relation to the establishment of dispersed Israelite nation states starting in Chad and into the furthest extremities in West Africa. So what we see here, or what I have, 5 dates, and these are 5 dates that state empirical evidence of Israelites being in Africa. And the first one we'll start with is from a gentleman by the name of Procopius from the 6th century AD, who was a prominent Byzantine scholar. And in his book, what he says, that at that time the idea occurred to the Emperor Justinian to ally with himself the Ethiopians and the Himyarites in order to injure the Persians. Now, as he goes in this, he further goes down, and I'm just going to go down and read, and I'm going to start right here. And it says, and as one sails into the sea from there, the Egyptian mountains lie on the right, extending toward the south. On the other side, a country deserted by men extends northward to an indefinite distance, and the land on both sides is visible as one sails in far as the island can. Not less than 1,000 stays distance from the city of Elis. On this island, Hebrews have lived from of old in autonomy. So that's from Procopius, 6th century. And next, what we're going to go to is to a gentleman by the name of Eldad. And in the book, Eldad Travels, A Journey from Lost Tribes to the Present, written by Micah J. Perry, we're going to extrapolate from sources from the 8th century, 875 AD. And it speaks, and it says that the Quran community queried to Arzama, wished to inform our master that a man by the name of Eldad the Danite from the tribe of Dan visited our community. He told us that 4 tribes, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, are in one place, ancient Ebalis, rather Avila, where the gold is. They have a judge by the name of Abaddon, and they pass judgment on the 4 capital punishments. Residing in tents, they travel from place to place and set up camp. They are immersed in battle with the 7 kings of Kush. And further down it says, although they possess the Hebrew Bible in its entirety, they read neither from the scroll of Esther's deeds, for they were not involved in that same miracle. So a good thing to start off and to notice that when we're going to be reading about these sources, 2 things is going to always mention, or rather 2 things you're going to notice. One is that these are warrior type people, and also that they have a tradition without the Talmud. They have things that if you were aligned with the Second Temple, you would have knowledge of. These Israelites do not, because they were not associated with that, being that they left either from the destruction of the nation of Israel by Syria, or it was the destruction of the temple. So they weren't in the process of coming back to Israel, staying in Babylon, living in the North African Israelite communities. But let's continue. They say that the smallest among them will chase many, and each of them shouts the battle cry loud as the roar of the lion. And they battle in war until the 3 months are over, whereupon they come with all the booty to the king Adel, and he divides everything up evenly among the Israelites. So let's continue, and just keep in mind that it's always going to be that same narrative where they're always under oppression. So the next book we're going to go to is by Serban Ibn Mukafa, written in, it says 11th century, but it was being compiled as early as the 9th century. And what he says in his book, Patriarchs of Alexandria, that it was that a woman, a queen of Bani el-Hamya, or rather Himyarite or Hamarite, had revolted against him and against his country. She took captive from it many people and burned many cities and destroyed churches and drove him from place to place. That which befell him was retribution for what the king who was before him had done to the metropolitan in the days of the father Abba-Kamas, as we have explained earlier, through his falsification and his fraud. Now, in the book, The Itinerary of Benjamin to Adel, it's going to state that on page 128, a little before Gihon, which descends from the land of Cush, over which there rules a king, which they call Sultan Eligba, which is the true name of the Neget. Nevertheless, he relates many things For example, he writes that Jews did inhabit great mountains and lived according to their own. And from the 1300s or 14th century traveler Marco Polo, he states that Abasha, i.e. Habashi, Abyssinia, is a very great province, and you must know that it constitutes the Middle India, and it is on the mainland. There are in it 6 great kings with 6 great kingdoms, and of these 6 great kings, there are 3 that are Christians and 3 that are Saracens, but the greatest of all the 6 is a Christian, and all the others are subject to him. There are also Jews in the country, and these bear 2 marks, one on either cheek. So those are several sources speaking of Israelites in Africa. And now we will go to the ancient kingdom of Dimit and see the Israelite present there as well. In the book, a particular description of all the known borders, coasts, and islands of Africa, which John Leo Africanus has left undescribed, collected out the sundry already many ancient and late writers. It says on page 41, the kingdom of Damut does border upon the kingdom of Zor, and is enclosed on either side with the lake Barcia and the land of Zungbubar. However, or howbeit, other places Damut between the kingdoms of Vang and Guam towards the west. And then we go further down, and it says, the slaves of this kingdom are much esteemed and are commonly sold throughout all Arabia, Persia, and Egypt, where they prove most valiant soldiers. So we see the slaves of this kingdom, again, are proved to be the most valiant and most hardened soldiers. And as we continue to go down, and I'll say, let's go here. It says, following Kafat's, being as black as pitch and of a mighty stature, and as some think, descendant of the Jews. Now, with such turmoil among the Israelites, the question is not only why did this happen, because as we see here, this is speaking of conflict in the kingdom and the slaves being sold off. So we want to see not only why did this happen, but when. And that's what we're about to look into now with the split of the kingdom of Ethiopia. Now, the Aksumite kingdom, as well as its Falasha inhabitants, are peripherally known. However, the turmoil, the new kingdoms, and dispersion of thousands of Israelites or citizens of Israel is a fact hardly given the light of day. And for this demonstration, we'll be looking at the book of the Patriarchs of Alexander, with the composition starting in the 9th century. We're going to have the Kebra Nagaz, which is earliest text being found in the 14th century. And lastly, the books to travels to discover the source of the Nile, written in the 18th century by James Bruce, who for over 10 years lived on the Nile. Now, again, while we are all familiar and acquainted with the Ethiopian Yuhadin or Jew, what we are not familiar with is the massive split between the Israelites who accepted Roman Catholicism and the Israelites who did not. It was those who accepted Roman Christianity that were able to, with the assistance of Christendom, repulse and sent to flight those of the noble family that resisted conversion, while simultaneously establishing their kingdom in Ascom, while the family that fled settled in the mountains and came to be known as the Simeon dynasty, centered in the highlands of Ethiopia, remaining a power there up until the 16th century. And it's the fleeing of those Israelites into greater Africa that came to make up a sizable portion of the West African population, and one we shall examine further. About the year 960, an attempt was made by this family to mount the throne of Abyssinia, as we shall see hereafter, when the princes of the house of Solomon were nearly extirpated upon the rock Damo. This, it is probably produced more animosity and bloodshed. At last, the power of the Falasha was so much weakened that they were obliged to leave the country of Dimba, having no cavalry to maintain themselves there and to take possession of the rugged and almost inaccessible rocks in that high ridge called the Mountain of Simeon. One of these, which nature seems to have for a fortress, they chose for their metropolis, and it was ever after called the Yuhadin or the Jews' Rock. On page 171, History of the Holy Eastern Church, it says, in his days, the king of Abyssinia sent to the king of Nubia a youth whose name was George, and made known to him how the Lord had chastised him, he and the inhabitants of his land. It was that a woman of Queen of Bani el Hamya, Beni el Damuta, had revolted against him and against his country. She took captive from it many people and burned many cities and destroyed churches and drove him, the king, from place to place. And in the book Benjamin Tudel, or rather the itinerary of Benjamin of Tudel, he states that from there it is 12 days to Zebed, where there are a few Jews. From there it is 8 days journey to Kush, which is on the mainland called the land of Aden. And this is the Eden which is in Thessalar. The country is mountainous. There are many Israelites here, and they are not under the yoke of the Gentiles, but possess cities and castles on the summits of the mountains. These are the Libyans of the land of Libya, with whom the Jews are at war. The Yehudim take spoil and booty and retreat to the mountains, and no man can prevail against them. So we see, according to the sources, that there existed an Israelite kingdom in East Central Africa, rebelling against the Roman Catholicism that the Axumites readily accepted. A dynasty that resisted the conversion ruled from the Semit Mountains. Ethiopian kings and privileged descendants of Zadok, who was a high priest during the reign of King David and King Solomon. According to the tradition of the Beta Israel community, Zadok's sons Azara was sent to Ethiopia together with Menelik. And Tadassa Tamrit, an Ethiopian historian and scholar of Ethiopian studies, in his book, History, or rather Church and State in Ethiopia, he states, the country of the Habasha has been ruled by a woman for many years now. She has killed the king of the Habasha, who was called Hadani. Until today, she rules with complete independence in her own country and the frontier areas country of the Hadani in the southern part of the country. And this is by Abba Hakal. That's 960 AD. So the evidence makes it abundantly clear. But let's go to page 526 of the book Travels to the Source of the Nile. It states an independent sovereignty in one family of Jews had always been preserved on the mountain of Saman, and the royal residence was upon a high pointed rock called the Jews or Yahadim Rock. Several other inaccessible mountains served as natural fortresses for this people. So, according to the sources stating of Israelites heavy in the area, and this last part, let's go here, and it says, in the neighborhood of Lafta, both countries were likewise much infected with Judaism. It indicates a heavy presence in the land of Israel, of Africa, of Israelites before the dissolution of these kingdoms. So the next question is, where did these people go? One place is with the Hebrews of Somalia, or the Yabir people. So looking here, we see a firmly established Israelite community in Africa, or rather Ethiopia proper, and also knowing that there are well-known and established Israelite communities spread across North Africa at this time. However, as I stated, those are the migrations that we're not going to look at. For at this time, we're going to continue westward and look to the effects of the dissolvement of the Israelite surging in Africa. And we're going to look at that with the Yabir. Now, traditionally, the Yabir claim that their Jewish ancestors arrived in Somali prior to the formation of the major noble Somali clans. Commonly, they trace their paternal lineage, these Somali clans, to the 9th century Arabian ancestors. Some scholars have suggested that Dawood and Isaac were only founded in the 13th century. If this was true, then the Yabir are also likely to be older than the two Somali clans. That is because the Yabir were presumably already established as a powerful group in Somali by the time of Muhammad Hanif in the 13th century. The Yabir, also referred to as Yabir, Yeber, or Yahar, are Somali people. They have traditionally been endogamous, and their hereditary occupation has been as magicians, leatherwork, dispensing traditional medicine, and making amulets. Endogamous means they stay amongst their own, they marry within their tribe. The Yabir have a language they keep secret from the ruling Somali clans. Although Muslims and ethnically similar to other Somalis, the Yabir caste has been traditionally denigrated, demeaned, and discriminated against by higher social strata of the Somali society. During the later half of the 20th century, Somalis suffered from famine, national wars, civil wars, life under warlords, and a complete lack of infrastructure. Although all Somalis have had to learn to survive troublesome circumstances, there are likely no greater survivors than the people from the Yabir tribe, who are a mysterious outcast clan in a failed state. In predominantly Muslim Somali, the other tribes and clans have despised the Yabir because of their alleged Jewish origins. In Somali, Yabir means Hebrew. It is uncertain whether the Yabir will ever make significant progress. For many years, the Lord forbade them in education. So here we read about the Yabir people being in Somali and being of Israelite extraction. The Yabir are also known for their skill in blacksmith and making iron tools and weaponry. Historically, the Yabir have practiced a diversity of culinary trades such as folk medicine, spirituality, and magic. As part of their traditional professional practices, they made and sold varieties of herbal medicines and performed traditional surgery. So with the Yabir, we saw one example of a dispersion of the Falasha, and that would be the Yabir people, as we just read, living in the places of Somali. But let's look at certain facts about the kingdom of Demet and the consequences of its dissolution, which is that it created two separate Israelite kingdoms, Ascom and Simeon, with the latter being slowly attrition until totally wiped out in the 16th century. Now, with the population of over 500,000, where did these people go? I posit it is the Falada people of West Africa. Not only will I show the cultural and systematic ties of the Falada and Falasha people, I will also show one of the greatest empires of Middle Age Africa, Mali, to be in fact possibly of Israelite origin and extraction. So we have seen the Hebrews of Somali, or rather the Yabir. But now let's look further into this obscure kingdom of Israel and its concealed existence, and how this expellment of Falashas could possibly be the Ignamic Falada people. In the book, or rather dissertation by Tanya Swartz, Ethiopian Jewish immigrants living in Israel, states, the Solomonic kings, the dynasty which started in 1270 and traced its descent from King Solomon into the ancient Ethiopian kingdoms of Ascom, set out to impose hegemony on all the independent peoples, including the Ayub, or Jewish populations, of the Ethiopian highlands. The Beta Israel, who were geographically dispersed and politically divided at the time, rebelled and resisted conversion. In response to this external threat, the religious basis of the group was strengthened, and a centralized and relatively unified political organization was established by the 16th century. However, by the early 17th century, they were totally defeated and lost their independence. Emperor Yeshak reign was a significant period in the history of the Beta Israel, because it marked the beginning of their dislocation and loss of land rights. The emperor is said to have decreed, he who is baptized in the Christian religion may inherit the land of his father, otherwise let him be a Falasi, which means a landless person, a wanderer. A later scribe added the comment, since then the Beta Israel house of Israel have been called Falashak, exiles. The Beta Israel responded by either converting to Christianity or migrating to areas of poor quality farmland which were vacant, or by staying on their land. So here is another instance of persecuted Israelites being not only forced from their homeland, but also forced to give up their possessions and being flung out of their home domains as refugees. So in looking for these expelled Falashas, my research has led me to understand it's the Falada people. Now, who are the lost Falasha of Ethiopia? And there's many reasons for me stating so, and here are a few. The Falada people, although in West Africa, they have their origins in Ethiopia and the waters of the Blue Nile. The Falada Umbaro, who entered the historical record circa 15th century, originally came from Western Africa and resettled in the Blue Nile in the beginning of the 1950s. They were permitted by the indigenous tribes to use the natural resources. The Falada Umburu actually consists of several ethnic groups which have their own local language, religion, and native homeland, originally from Western Africa countries including Mali, Mauritania, Cameroon, and Nigeria. Falada live in the forest savanna plains between El Obi and Adamazin. The reclusive Falada people are a Semitic tribe that migrated from Western Africa to Greater Sudan starting in the 19th century. So these Falada, who are described as marauders, settlers, and tribal nomads in the historical accounts, entered into the West African sphere around the 15th century. So let's go back and see also some other things about them, because just like the Falada people are ostracized and they continue in that tradition. And let's just continue further and see. Operating in varying tribal makeups, from peaceful settlers, marauding or encroaching invaders, the Falada people are littered throughout 15th to 19th century historical accounts of them dotted along all East, Central, and West Africa. When you investigate the Falada people, you see a Semitic people that the world at large has no concrete knowledge of their origins. In an article from Al Jazeera speaking on the trials and tribulations of the Falada people, Nazarene Gates states that they are vulnerable. The World Vision Security and Development Officer told Al Jazeera, because nobody understands who they are or has investigated their movement. The war in this country affects them and they need help, but they need to be stable so NGOs can build a relationship with them. Next to me is the most interesting and one of the most, or rather, let's just go to it. Now, the writer Abdul Habtabah, who gave us that proverb, when an African elder dies, it's like a library has been burnt down. He also compares his people, who are the Fula, the Fulani, the Falada, as being persecuted and handled as if they were the Yuhadin. But like I was saying, one of the most pertinent and most interesting things or ties to Israel is that they share the same way of life. Now, over the next few seconds, I'll be showing more undeniable evidence of links of Israel and Africa. But let's look at this. Central to the Falada's people lifestyle is a code of behavior known as Paluka, which is passed on by each generation as high moral values of the Wodabi, which enable them to maintain their identity across boundaries and changes of lifestyle. Essentially viewed as what makes a person Falada, Paluka includes Munyal, Halakil, and Sagada, which is patience, wisdom, tenergy, self-control, modesty, courage, hard work. Now, the Fulani, the word is Puluga, or rather Pulaka. And what that means is basically the Falada pathways. Now, when we look at what we as Israel practice, it's Halakha, which is Hebrew for the way. So that right there is a very pertinent and anthropological tie to Israel. But let's look at further primary contemporary evidence of the Yahadim in the deepest recesses of Africa. Al-Idrisi in the 12th century states that they were formerly in Cameroon well-known towns and remarkable residences, but the people of the Zagawa and La Motua of the desert, who inhabited both sides of this country, undertook the conquest, annihilated most of these towns, and dispensed or destroyed their tribes. The inhabitants of the country of Cameroon, according to the report of the merchants, claimed to be Israel, claimed to be Yahadim. Their belief is a confused mixture of all things. They recognize neither kings nor property rights. They are expelled and destroyed by all. And as we go further, let's go to the account We can go to the account of Leo Africanus writing in the 16th century. And he states, moreover, this part of the world is inhabited especially by 5 principal nations, by people called Kafri or Kafs, that is to say outlaws or lawless, by the Abyssinians, the Egyptians, the Arabians, and the Africans or Moors, properly so, which last are of 2 kinds, namely white or tawny Moors, and Negroes or black, the diverse Moors, of all which nations some are Gentiles, which of religions in Africa worship idols, others of the sect of Muhammad, some Christians, and some Jewish in religion. In the book, a particular description of all the knowledge, borders, and coasts of the inlets in Africa, we see on page 32. The Abyssinians have no great knowledge of Nile by reason of the mountains which divide them from it, for which cause they call Abgani the father of the rivers. Howbeit, they say that upon knowledge do inhabit 2 great and populous nations, one of Israel toward the west under the government of a mighty king, the other more southernly, consisting of Amazons. And again, back to Leo Africanus on page 163, he says that all which you may read more fully and at large in the Persian and African chronicles, those Africans which inhabited Libya and Nubia, where each of them worship some certain planet, unto whom likewise they offer sacrifices and prayers. Some others of the land of Negroes worship Gohismo, that is to say, the Lord of heaven. And this sound point of religion was not delivered unto them by any prophet or teacher, but was inspired, as it was, from God himself. After that, having the Yuhadin law, wherein they are said to have continued many years. Afterward, they professed the Christian religion and continued Christians until such time as the Mohammedan superstitions prevail. And going further down, it says, neither is there any Negro region in all the Negro land which has in it this day any Christians at all. At the same time, such as were founded to be Jews, Christians, or of the African religion were slain, every man of them. So next we're going to be looking at a brief anthropological study of Israelite culture in West Africa and Africa at large. Now, as we said earlier, anthropology is the study of human beings, especially the study of their ancestors through time and space and in relation to physical character, environmental, social relations, and culture. Now, in the book Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile, it says, I asked them, being from Judea, where they got that language which they spoke, whether it was one of the languages of the nations which they had learned on the coast of the Red Sea. They apprehended, but it was mere conjecture, that the language which they spoke was that of the nations they had found on the Red Sea, after their leaving Judea and settling there. And the reason they gave was certainly a pertinent one, that they came into Abyssinia speaking Hebrew with the advantage of having books in that language, but they had now forgot their Hebrew, and it was therefore not probable that they should retain any other language in which they had no books. I was informed that the black Jews possessed formerly copies written on goat skins, and that in the synagogue of the black Jews there was an old record chest into which the decayed copies of their scriptures had been thrown. I accordingly went to the synagogue with a few of the chief men and examined the contents. The manuscripts were of various kinds, on parchments, goat skins, and cotton paper, and that's on Christian Researches in Asia, page 182. Now, continuing with the independent biblical tradition, or rather independent biblical textual tradition, it states in the New History of Ethiopia that the only copy of the Old Testament which they have is in Ge'ez, the same made use by the Abyssinian Christians, who are the only scribes, and sell these copies to the Ayub. And it is very singular that no controversy or dispute about the text has ever yet arisen between the professors of the two religions. They have no curative or various reasons. They never heard of the Talmud, Targum, or Kabbalah. Neither have they any fringes or ribbons upon their garment. Nor is there, as far as I can learn, one scribe among them. So The next thing we're going to be looking at is one of my favorite parts that I like to look at is the same ritual behavior. Now, at first glance, one would think that Israelite culture is the furthest thing away from African culture. But when looked into it, it's more similarities that surpass mere coincidence when it comes to the customs and traditions of Africa. As for instance, scarification. Scarification as a cultural activity is widely performed across Africa. In essence, it is the practice of incising the skin with a sharp instrument. And El Idrisi, he states that the residents of Lam are Israelites and for the most part immersed in ignorance and impiety. When they reach the age of puberty, they stigmatize or rather scarifize their face and temples by means of fire. These are signs which serve to make them recognize themselves in their countrymen. And also Marco Polo states there are in it 6 great kings with 6 great kingdoms, and of these 6 kings there are 3 kings that are Christian and 3 that are Saracen, but the greatest of all 6 is a Christian. And it also states further down there are also Jews in the country, and these bear 2 marks, one on either cheek. So we're going to continue on and we're going to look at more anthropological evidence, and we see that same laws amongst certain African tribes concerning marriage. So in a book, Mission from Cape Coast Castle, it states, in King Opoku's kingdom of Ashanti, a man and woman were beheaded on the 17th of the month for this intrigue. The woman was very handsome and the wife of a captain. On their being suspected, both were ordered to drink doom, which choking them, they were immediately executed. And we see here on page 127, description of the coast of North and South Guinea. Sometimes the belly mo causes a person drinking to drink a large draught of liquor composed of 2 sorts of a thick bark of nail and tawny trees, which they reckon a perfect poison. If he be innocent, he will vomit it up immediately, but if guilty, will foam about his mouth and thereby prove him guilty and punishable with death. I cannot here forbear making this observation, which is in my opinion may be acceptable, and is that this drink administered here to women suspected of adultery may be derived and used in imitation of the water called by the Jews of jealousy.
Mugumba kupaling bembika wadwa de giniri wi money. Uri hiwi wi money. We ijipolisa, uri sa mukifungu. Manuga sette. Manengo kafungu. Naam.
Chief Sorrow has passed the problem of deciding the truth to Benge, a scarce and expensive poison with a strychnine base. It is used in the most important and trustworthy of Zande oracles. Representatives are appointed for Bukoyo and Gume to consult the Benge operator who administers the poison to chickens. The operator will ask the chickens whether Bukoyo did in fact sleep with the wife of Gingiti. Whether the chickens live or die will determine the truth. The ritually proper preparations for the use of Benge take some days, so until then the accused, Bukoyo and Gume, are kept together in a prison hut on Sorrow's compound. There they will work for the chief until judgment has been passed.
So there, we've seen an excellent tie of Israelite culture in the deepest parts of Africa. But now, let's go to some things that I find also interesting. You have African names that are in the Bible. And these names right here are all the names that we see that occur in the Bible that are contemporary with Guyana names. And I pulled this video, and this is the title of the video. I suggest you guys see it. We're not going to watch all of it, but we're just going to look at a little bit of it and see.
Did you know that there are hundreds of Ghanaian names in the Bible? Yes, hundreds of names of millions of Ghanaians are still in the Bible. It is present in the King James Version as well as the local Akan Bible. Here are some few prominent ones. Please read the Bible quotations that are attached to each name, and you will find that the names often spell the same and mean the same. The first name we'll consider is Anan. This name is often spelled with a double N in the middle. However, this is a recent phenomenon. Traditionally, the name has always been spelled with a single N in the middle. So 2 examples. 1. Kofi Annan, a renowned Ghanaian diplomat. The next one is Annan Ankoma. So you can see that in Kofi Annan, the ends are the 2 ends in the middle.
So like I said, let's
Annan
continue
Ankoma,
on.
there's only
Please
one end,
check out that video.
but they are all the same and they come from the same location.
Now, in the book, A Description of the Coast of North and South Guinea, it states on page 79, I have shown how much these Africans are subject to superstition, and shall add no more, but this one particular, that they will not ease themselves at sea unless they be too far from the shore, and when they do it at land, they cover it with earth or fine sand. And we all know that's akin to the law that we find in Deuteronomy 23:13. And thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be, when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. Leo Africanus states, to the north of Congo, upon the sea coast, beginneth the kingdom of Luango, tributary in time past to the king of Congo. It abounds with elephants, and the inhabitants called Brahmas are circumcised after the Yahadim matter. In his book Geography a Jersey, he states, as for the city of Duster, or Chester, it is, as we have already said, built in eminence. At its gates the water rises by means of a lock to Fak, Duke. It is said that the prophet Daniel was buried in the Tuster River. Ibn Hakul reports that it was Abu Musa el-Akabari who found the coffin of this prophet. The Jews worshipped him in their synagogues and regarded him as a talisman by means of which they hoped in times of drought to obtain rain. So here we see Israelites using charms and talismans, and this is the next part that I want to get to, which is very interesting, and it's a very strong cultural tie, and not only a cultural tie, but a positive claim that Israel is just as African as any African, be it good or bad. Now here we see gree-gree, amulets, and fetishes. These are all the items associated with divination, sorcery, things of that nature. In Africa, they deal with the term fetish more than not. So just a quick reading of these things. It says a talisman is an amulet, voodoo charm, spell, or incantation believed capable of warding off evil. You have an amulet, and these are the scriptures that are associated with it. But in the book Description of the Coast, it says, I must further add in relation to these gree-grees of the blacks that they may have perhaps been originally made in imitation of ancient practice of the Yuhadim of wearing phylacteries, that is, rolls or flips of parchment with some sentences of scriptures written on them, according to what God had commanded. And here we see instances of all the prophets speaking against sorcery. Isaiah says, when someone tells you to consult mediums and spirits who whisper and mutter, should not people inquire of their Elohim? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? We have Micah. We have the book written in Chronicles. So here we see evidence that in the book New Orleans Superstitions by Lecedino Hearn, written in 1886, it says, the fear of what are styled voodoo charms is much more widely spread in Louisiana than anyone who had conversed only with educated residents might suppose. And the most familiar superstition of this class is the belief in what I might call pillow magic, which is the supposed art of wasting sickness or even death by putting certain objects into the pillow of the bed in which the hated person sleeps. Feather pillows are supposed to be particularly well adapted to this kind of witchcraft. It is believed that by secret spells of voodoo can cause some monstrous kind of bird or nondescript animal to shape itself into being out of the pillow feathers. Like the tulip of the Esquimaux, it grows very slowly and by night only, but when completely formed, the person who has been using the pillow dies. Another practice of pillow witchcraft consists of tearing a living bird asunder and putting portions of the wings into that very pillow. A third form of the black art is confined to putting certain charms or fetishes consisting of bones, hairs, feathers, rags, strings, or some sort fantastic combination of these and other trifling objects into any sort of a pillow used by the party whom it is desired to injure. The pure Africanism of this practice needs no comment. Any exact idea concerning the use of each particular kind of charm I have not been able to discover, and I doubt whether those who practice such fetishism know the original African beliefs connected with it. Some say that putting grains of corn into a child pillow prevents it from growing anymore. Others declare that a bit of cloth in a grown person pillow would cause wasting sickness, but different parties questioned by me gave each a different signification to the use of charms. Putting an open pair of scissors under the pillow before going to bed is supposed to stop it. Now, the interesting thing is, these are the very things that we speak about in the Torah specifically. In Ezekiel 12, 17 to 20, we see it says, "Thus says the Most High, woe to the women that sew pillows to all armholes and make kerchiefs upon the head of every statue to hunt souls. Will you hunt the souls of my people, and will you save the souls alive that come unto you? Wherefore, thus says the Most High." Let's go back. Or rather, but we can continue. But we see right there in those verses, and you can go back, that is speaking specifically of that same practice that we seen that the lady was speaking of in Louisiana. Now let's continue. "For the king of Babylon stood at the parting of the way, at the head of two ways to use divination. He made his arrows bright, and he consulted with the images. He looked into the liver." Ezekiel 21:21.
Now that the people and the cattle are together, it's important to try and get some idea of the future. Some Morsi, like Biobume, have special skill in reading entries.
There is a tradition in West Africa of several tribes claiming origin from Northeast Africa. Amongst the Yoruba peoples as well as the Igbo, they have their oral tradition, them coming from Northeast Africa. For centuries in Africa, Asia, and Europe as well, rumors and tales of where the 10 lost tribes of Israel are was the question of ancient scholars from Tertullian to contemporaries such as Dirk Lange, with records speaking of the king of Ghana holding court, flanked by 10 horses with golden saddles, along with 10 young men adorned in gold as well. Possibly an allusion, like I was saying, of those same lost tribes. On page 229, Mission to Cape Coast, Africa, Thomas Bodis states, "Kings ruling over 12 tribes, Torah amongst certain tribes, and also having these things before any Christian or Muslim interaction." On page 229, it states, "One curious evidence, however, may be added of the former identity of the Ashanti, Warsaw, Fanti, Akim, Asin, Akumbo, and part of the Ahanti nations, which is a tradition that the whole of these people were originally comprehended in 12 tribes or families. Those Africans of Limia and Numidia worship each a particular planet to which they offer prayers and sacrifices. Others of the land of the Negroes work of Gohismu, the Lord of Heaven, which religion was not given them by any prophet, but were inspired with it by God himself. The Jewish law prevailed among them afterwards many years." Manuscript C of the Tariq al-Fatash describes a community called the Bani Israel that in 1402 existed in Terdama, which is Mali. They possessed over 300 wells and had 7 leaders, had an army of 1,500 men. So let's go and read it. It says, hundreds of the remaining ones and Ormakaza took over, and that of the year. Now, what I did, this is an exact, I had to I translated, so it's kind of, the reading is kind of here and there, but we're just going to glance over it, and you can definitely take your time and look at it and read it and get the true context and the whole context of the matter. But we're going to read it. It says, asked Muhammad that Bani warned a city with a camel, a Banak in Algeria and the deserts, so that I regret that it is that place, and the dwelling elephant was the sum of the sons of Israel and their grandfathers and their wells there until now, when they saw their arrays and found it on that day. I'm gonna go further down, and it says his grandfather said that none of these wells that were destroyed by the people of Israel did not redeem them. So this is from manuscript C, and this is written in Arabic. So let's continue on. And with that, we're going to be looking at the Limba people and their traditions, along with the Ghana Yuhadin, the Dan tribe, and also the Mali people. And we're going to be going into these peoples and their Israelite culture. The kingdom of Ouagadougou, situated as it were between the southern Sahara Desert and the savanna grasslands north of the West African forest. Ouagadougou, located on major routes of the Trans-Saharan trade network, traded in gold, ivory, salt, cola, and cloth. Control of these routes were crucial to its expansion and success, especially once West Africa gold was in high demand throughout the Islamic world and beyond. From Aswan, it is a distance of 12 days to Halan, where there are about 300 Jews. There, people travel in caravans, a journey of 50 days through the great desert called Sahara, to the land of Zala, which is Havala, in the land of Ghana. In this desert, there are mountains of sand, and when the wind rises, it covers caravans with the sand, and many die from suffocation. Those that escape bring back with them copper, wheat, fruit, all manner of lentils, and salt. And from there they bring gold and all kinds of jewels. This is the land of Kush. From Helen, it is 13 days' journey to Kush, which is Kush, and this is the commencement of the land of Egypt. At Kush, there are 300 Jews. Now, when we look at the Akan people, within those Akan people, we have the Sefuiyasu, and a Ghanaian man named Antron Tukafa, living in the community of Sefuisu in western Ghana, had a vision and spoke with spirits, driving him to believe that he and his fellow Ghanaians were indeed descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. He saw a clear connection and many similarities between his people's practices and those of Judaism. For example, it was a tradition in Sefwi for Saturday to be a day of rest. Such a strong tradition that Sefwi didn't adhere to it were frequently punished. Sefwi also followed the Jewish dietary law restricting the consumption of pork. Members of the male community were circumcised in youth. Tukafri was first viewed as crazy, but over time his vision became more and more readily accepted. And this is, we see here, the house of Israel in Sefuiyasu. And not only is this oral tradition among its inhabitants, but even its own chiefs, such as Kofi Nakua II, state that they came from Israel through Nile, Gali, and Mali. So let's continue on. And like I say, it's not only him, but we're going to look at the word Gideon itself. Now, Gideon was a military leader, judge, prophet, whose triumphant victory over the Midianites resulted in his becoming ruler, judge of Israel. Son of Joash, Gideon is the true protagonist of the supposed 300 told by Greek lore, in that not only did Israel come out victorious, but he and his men survived to tell the tale. Now, it's some important things to remember, and that's that Gideon, rooted in the word Gada, as we see on the screen, means feller or fighter, and was a warrior through and through. and one of Israel's greatest warriors at that. And one of his forms of the word, and in this case of the verb tense, is Wagadu. But let's continue. The kingdom of Ghana, meaning warrior king, properly known as Wagadu, was founded around the year 750. It developed in a region between Senegal and Niger rivers. The people of Ghana used their ability to make iron swords, spears, and lances to subdue neighboring people and to gain control over West Africa's main trade routes. Now remember that, as I said earlier, Gideon was a warrior through and through. And it is in remembrance of, or rather in the spirit of that name, that the title Gada, or rather Ghana, was given to their kings. Also, in 2 Chronicles 31:1, it speaks of Israel cutting down and returning Israel back to worshiping Yah, or rather cutting down the idols and return back to worshiping Yah. Because just as I have been saying for the duration of this presentation, Israel has always had a record of pagan practices, and that act of Wagadu, or action of Israel breaking and destroying those idols, and that action of that word can clearly be tied to the name Wagadu and the capital, or the central town of the Empire of Ghana. So in Ghana, we see a clear connection to Israel from archaeological, historical, migratorial evidence, and more when looking at the fact that when we see the kingdom in Simeon was none other than the Gideon dynasty, it makes sense that it's very sensible that Ghana, the warrior kings, or rather Gada kings, can very well be a continuation of the kingdom of Simeon mountains. So one can say that the whole of Africa was not Israel, but what one cannot say is that there was not a heavy Israelite presence in Africa, because just in the area of Lam alone, we see several tribes of Africa residing in those areas. So next we're going to move on to the Limba. The Limba people of South Africa, with the oral history and cultural traits that are tied to Israel, along with anthropological evidence, will get us into an understanding and why they say these things. Mushabi Mutenda, Limba oral scholar, states, in 586, they, the Limba, were captured and brought to Mesopotamia and rescued by the Buba. The Buba are the priestly class of the Limba. Arriving in Senna, they eventually left via Pusula and the Great Ocean. Arriving in Africa, they traveled through Mozambique, Zimbabwe, eventually settling in Africa. Now, at the mouth of the Zambezi, Tutor Parfit found the remnants of stone structures in which later he came to find out was a town called Sayuna, or rather Senna. And when you look at it, Senna or Sayuna means Zion in Arabic. And it's the same place that's located South Yemen, which is an abandoned city according to the indigenous population, was deserted by the inhabitants leaving to Africa, traveling through the Masula or Pusula Valley. Also of note is that the inhabitants of the area, according to Tutor Parfit in Yemen, carries the same tribal name as those by the Limba. So here we clearly see by the oral history, the archaeological and anthropological history, the claims that the Limba make of being Israel are valid. But let's go to the Dan tribe, or the Dan people. The Dan people are once reclusive and still mysterious people existing among the inhabitants of Africa. These people share uncanny similarities with the ancient Israelites. I'll be quoting Dr. Yai Dayan Robert, and we'll be looking to the heritage and the culture of the people of Dan. Dan people of the Ivory Coast and Liberia can be found in Ivory Coast and Liberia and are also known as the Gio people. They are part of the Niger-Congo family of the Mandi ethnic group. Their language is related to neighboring Mandis, which is Guro, and Mano. They migrated from Western Sudan region to the north, which is part of present-day Mali and Guni. The Dan and Mano settled in the Savannah region as early as the 8th century. In the 10th century, it is said because of political turmoil, population growth, the land depletion caused migration, so they migrated south of present Nimba range into the high forest. Dan warrior chief called Grube Zombi, he fought and defeated them later and also pushed the ethnic groups that once lived in Nimba country as far as to Laguda and Ivory Coast. So let's go down. In Dan culture, African arts plays a big role, such as carving wooden masks, sculptures, and traditional wooden spoons, followed by the manhood initiation. Boys initiated are guided throughout lives and prepare them to encounter mysteries in both physical and spiritual world. They also learn about the rules of an adult and take good care of their wives. All dancers wear masquerades while all males attend one known as Bush School. This initiation is for both adolescents and societies. They trace their lineage to one common paternal ancestor. There are approximately 700,000 members of the group, and their largest settlement is Man, Ivory Coast. Neighboring peoples include the Kron, Capel, and Mano. They are officially known as Yakuba or Yakuba in Ivory Coast. In Liberia, they are also known as Gio, Bassa for slave, which is considered a derogatory exonym. And now let's go to some of the excerpts from Dr. Yvonne Robert. The Torah and the traditions of the Ivorian tribe of Dan, the number of coincidences grows when we know something about the beliefs and culture of the tribe of Dan. There are a number of elements that are in line with what we find in the Torah and what we know about the early days of the people of Israel. The name of the tribe of Dan. The name of their language is Yakuba. The tribe members called themselves quite often as well Yakuba. The observations of the Sabbath, starting from Friday at sunset till the sunset of Saturday. That day they do no work, and it is the day for the offerings. They gave it the name Sabaya. Originally, they were not allowed to walk that day more than a distance of about 7 kilometers, and in old days, the soldiers of the army arrested those working on that day. They believe in one God. They call him Yahweh, Creator and Almighty, amidst other appellations. They follow nearly exactly the instructions of Leviticus in bringing their offerings, especially meant for big sinners who need forgiveness. This is different from all surrounding tribes. Other elements in their culture that draw the attention are personal names like Atani, Yahuwah, and also deliberate marriage. The original official coat of priests and tribal leaders is long and white with the limited number of vertical blue stripes. Is it hazardous or coincidence, or does it show influence of a Jewish past? Those robes are not so different from the West African traditional robes, except for the blue stripes. That is a bit akin to the Jewish prayer robes. Originally, those robes were only meant for the priests. They bring their first fruits of the agricultural work to the priests before consuming anything of the harvest themselves. They have holy places hidden in the woods. These are not buildings, but they discern in between the general accessible area for tribal members, a holy place for the chieftains and priests, and a most holy place where only the high priest is allowed for the purpose of offering. The Danites in Ivory Coast do expect a savior who will bring happiness and well-being for them. So here we clearly see so much evidence of Israel and Africa. But let's continue. So when we look at the kingdom of Mali, we're going to go and take a couple of look at some of the sources that speak on it. The Mali Empire of West Africa was founded by Sundiata Keita of the Saniki following his victory over the Soso. Sundiata's centralized government, diplomacy, and well-trained army permitted a massive military expansion, which would pave the way for a flourishing of the Mali Empire, making it the largest yet seen in Africa. The reign of Mansa Musa saw the empire reach new heights in terms of territory control, cultural fluorescence, and the staggering wealth brought through the Mali's control of regional trade routes. So by and by, this is speaking of the Great Mali Empire, and here we see the approximate area of the Mali Empire. But as we go to the book Travels to the Inland of Africa, it states, in the whole land of Lamlam, there are but 2 small cities, or as it were, villages, and those are Mali and Dao, situated at the distance of 4 days' journey from each other. Their inhabitants, as people of those parts relate, are Yuhadin, and indeed most of them unbelieving and ignorant. When any of all the inhabitants of the kingdom of Lamlam comes to have the use of his reason, he is burnt in the face in temples. This they do for a token among themselves. All their countries and whole dominions is near a certain river flowing into the Nile. Now, it's evident that the source states Israelites being in the area, but the stickler may say, and rightly so, show us how is that Lamlam is Mali. Well, when we read the geography of Idrisi, he states that there are only 2 towns in the whole Lemlem which are not larger than towns. One of them is called Malai, which is Mali, and the other Dao. So like I just read, I'm just pointing it out even more clearer that out of those 2 towns in Lemlem, one of them is called Mali, which is Mali. So here we see the connection of Lamlam to Mali. But just to be sure, let's go to the book Mission from Cape Coast Castle to Ashanti. He says from Timbuktu to Hausa is 20 journeys. The 3 first through a wooden country and over the branch of the Niger to Azibi. And we go down, and the king named Serigi, and we go down, Kabi is not the name of the kingdom, but of a large dependent town in district on the Niger. Malawa or Marwa, as the Negroes pronounce it, to substitute the R for the L, is the next extensive in its limits to Borno. It is no doubt the kingdom of Mali. So the place that Idrisi was calling Malau is actually Mali. So brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, there we have seen primary evidence of not only Israel in West Africa, but the very kingdom of Mali having those same ties to Israel as well. So as I have been stating throughout this presentation, that displaced people cause displacement, and this does nothing but beg the question, what happened? So what we're going to look at now is the things that happened to the Israelite people that caused this displacement. And we're going to read and understand going on and just look at a couple of things. Now, with the emergence of Islam, several African polities were dissolved, or in the case of the Songhai Empire, rulers newly converted to Islam took drastic measures against the Israelite Yuhadin populace, which when added with the carrying away of all the inhabitants of Africa refusing to convert first to Roman Catholicism, then to Islam, it's enough data to conclude that these Israelites are the very stock and fountainhead of the Atlantic slave trade. To the southward of Biafra, at the distance 10 days' march, lies the land of Lamlam, which we just read about being full of Israelites, into which the incursions are made by the inhabitants of Biafra, Sala, Tukor, and Ghana. There they take numbers of captives, whom they carry away to their own countries and disposed of to merchants trading there. These afterwards sell them into all parts of the world, according to Al-Idrisi. In the description of the course of North and South Guinea, page 537, it states, the princes of this country are such enemies to Ayub that they are absolutely forbid in the country. And should it be known that the native merchants had any correspondence with them, their estates would be confiscated. And a geograph of history by Leo Africanus, he says, the name of this kingdom is a modern one, after a city which was built by a king named Mansa Suleiman in the year 610 of the Hajj. The houses of Timbuktu are huts made of clay-covered wattles with thatched roofs, and the city of the city is a temple built of stone. The king is a declared enemy of the Ayu, or Jews. He will not allow any to live in the city. If he hears it said that a Berber merchant frequents them or does business with them, he confiscates his good. Now, so here we see again of the persecution that befell Israel in Africa. And with that, we're going to look at into kingdom disintegration and cultural attrition, which leads to recent tribal beginnings. So we read about the turbulent and hostile environment of Israel by their neighbors, foreigners, and even their own countrymen. And here we see the basic development of what we, for the most part, attribute to the destruction of Israel en masse in Africa. Kingdom disintegration is the process of a kingdom losing cohesion or strength. The beginning of the 10th century saw the fall of Central and West African kingdoms, kingdoms that ruled and held suzerainty over the whole of Central Africa from east to west, a collapse that resulted in the diffusion of the African populace along with the destruction of its civilized life, sciences, and infrastructure, resulting in the emergence of the tribal designations we see today, all evidenced by the neophytic stage of tribal West African kingdoms and tribes established post-10th century. In 1076, Abu Bakr, along with the people of Tukur, after many years of bloodshed and conflict, captured the capital of Ghana, ending non-Muslim rule of the area in terms of convert or leave policies to its inhabitants. Muhammad began his reign in 1075 and formed alliances with the K, Tuba, Dabir, and Magumi. Muhammad was the first Muslim king of Canaan and was converted by his Muslim tutor, Muhammad Mahabi. So here we see that cultural attrition is the decline of cultural traditions evidenced by a slow dilution of its parent origin or tradition. So here we see the parent tradition in Numbers 25, where it entails that when suspected, only the woman, not the man, drinks of the potion to determine their guilt in the case of adultery. But when we go to further in history, like the Middle Ages, we see the shift where it is both the man and the woman partaking in the ritual. Now, when we go even further, we see present day time where it's neither the man nor the woman that partakes in the drink. In this case, it's only a chicken. So the cultural attrition is something that we got to pay attention to and notice when we see it. Another one would be two accounts we see here. Now, the first one is in the 12th century when they're having, speaking of people in the area being Jews. This is Al-Idrisi. But when we go to Africanus in the 16th century, all he speaks of is them having the cultural tie of circumcision. But when we go even further to that same area in the 18th century, these people are just pronounced as outright pagans. The anxiety of the Ashanti government for daily records immediately on the establishment of the Moors, who were only visitors until the present reign, acknowledges the perplexities and deficiencies of their early history too candidly to leave any encouragement to the research of strangers. Records beyond half a century are not to be found in the archives either of Cape Coast or Christiansburg castles, so that the chronology can only be found on that of the Moors in circumstances. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at how relatively new these people are, the Akan people. As we can see here that they basically were formed in the 13th century. Anything past the 13th century would be kind of hard to find accounts on them. So these Akan people come from a greater people, greater mass, just as with the Oyo, or rather the Yoruba people. They only go back to the 12th century. And we know these people have been here before the 12th century. We know in the area that these people lived in, who was there, who was persecuted in these areas. This goes the same for the fine people. You know, they had the Empire of Dahomey, but that was the 18th century. And when you go back to them, you know, you can kind of say maybe at most the 15th century. Who are the fine people before the 15th century? Who are these people? When we go to the Igbo people, you know, here we have, you know, supposed picture of the brother Olu Akwianu, who we even have some people calling him a liar in the name of the hatred for the Hamite hypothesis. The Igbo people go back to the 10th century. Who are the Igbo people before the 10th century? So when we look at all of the archaeological historical data, it's clear to see. And just something to note while we look at the area of Lamb Land is that this is the very same place where a supposed migration happened. And that would be the Bantu migration. These are places where these tribes exist. That's where these people live. They have a history. They have a pedigree. Now, am I saying all of the people in Africa, in America that are black are Israelites? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is there are over 3,000 tribes in Africa. And all we of the Israelite extraction state is that we are a stock of some of them.
We are the true Jews, the true Hebrews, the true and real Israelite right has been stolen by them. We are the true ones that fulfill Bible prophecy and scripture.
Isn't it a fact that you know by throwing out those terms you're guaranteed press coverage?
I'm not throwing out terms. I'm fighting age-old enemies, and I'm planting seeds in the minds and hearts of the youth and the masses of my people that we will not make the same mistakes.
The lips of the righteous teaches many, but fools die for want of wisdom. The rich man's wealth is in the sea,